Hi, everyone. This is Mike Rosenkrantz from Palms to Pines Parasports, and this is episode 7 of Getting Everyone Moving. Today, another incredible special guest, my friend Jess Markt, someone I met in India. Hey, Jess.
Hey, Mike. Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So, Jess, tell us how you got involved with adaptive sports.
So I started playing wheelchair basketball in 2000, about 3 years after I was in an automobile accident that left me a paraplegic. I had been an athlete growing up and gone back to University of Oregon, where I was studying at the time of my injury. And after I graduated, was invited to come and try out wheelchair basketball. And so after one practice, I was completely hooked and spent the next 17 years playing in the National Wheelchair Basketball Association. So that's how I got into it in the first place.
But you've taken that and you've expanded it to kind of bringing wheelchair basketball all over the world. And this started with you going to Afghanistan.
It did, yeah. I had a very unique opportunity in 2009. I got an email from a woman who had just come back from Afghanistan, who was doing a project there related to women's rights in the country. And while she was there doing some work up in the north of Afghanistan in a little village called Maimana, she randomly ran into a brand new team of wheelchair basketball players that had just been formed there, which was one of the first two teams that existed in Afghanistan. And talked to them and kind of tried to figure out what this was going on. Wheelchair basketball happening in this little village in the north of Afghanistan was the last thing she expected to see there. But she found out that they had just had this court made for them and that they were really excited to be playing, but really had no context for how basketball, much less wheelchair basketball, was supposed to work. So they were just sort of inventing their own version of the game. And they asked her if she would see if someone from the United States would come to Afghanistan and teach them how to play. So she came back, sent out an email to all the organizations she could find related to wheelchair basketball, one of which was the team I was playing for at the time, the New York Rolling Knicks. And of all the people that received that email asking for a volunteer coach to go to Afghanistan to teach these guys, I think I was probably the only one that thought that was a good idea. So I signed up, quote unquote, raised some money, bought a plane ticket, and spent a week and a half in Afghanistan in the fall of 2009, coaching for the first time. And it just completely changed my life. And I've been coaching internationally in Afghanistan and other conflict zones ever since.
So where's the Afghani team now in terms of competition? I mean, so it's been 11 years, and what have they been able to do?
Yeah, so we formed a national team for the men in 2013, after a few years of developing new teams and players, and then formed a women's national team in 2015. And both of those teams now, when we're not in COVID times and we've got international competitions going on, are competing once or twice a year in mainly regional tournaments in the Asia region, including Australia and New Zealand, but competing at some of the biggest competitions outside the Paralympics and the World Championships that take place in the world. So they've come a long way in the 11 years since I first went there.
And what do you think it's meant to the athletes, to go from playing right in this village to being able to compete kind of on an international stage?
Well, I think so for them, it's been a progression that I think they all very much appreciate it and are extremely excited by these opportunities. But they were all so young when they started playing that I think just being able to play a sport, being given the opportunity to do this thing that is such a fundamental part of most of our upbringings, it had never been a part of their upbringing. They had never been given those opportunities because being a person with a physical disability in a place like Afghanistan comes with a certain level of marginalization and certainly a lot of stigma in those societies. And so it was always assumed for them, whether they were disabled from birth or soon after, with many of them having contracted polio, or whether they were injured later in life, and started playing or started dealing with their disabilities a bit later, they were always told from that onset that they were not expected to have a real active role in their lives. And so being given the opportunity to play basketball, even on a little outdoor court, in the middle of Maimana, was already an incredible life-changing opportunity for them. But I think from that point, their confidence and sort of self-drive to achieve just grew exponentially. And I think by the time they had the opportunity to those who made national teams and were able to travel outside the country, by the time they got to that point, I think they had developed enough confidence and self-reliance that they kind of felt like they were ready for it. It has certainly been a life-changing experience for all of them in one way or another. But the great thing in watching that transformation happen over the years was how prepared they were for it, and how they felt like they deserved this opportunity, and it was really a realization of their potential that they just never had a chance to really experience before.
Yeah, unbelievable. And so, you coached in many countries, many difficult areas, Gaza, Sudan. I mean, why do you go to those areas, and talk about your role, of course, with the ICRC?
Yeah, so on that first trip to Afghanistan in 2009, at the end of that week of coaching with the team in Maimana, I drove with them across the north of the country to a city called Mazari Sharif, which is about a 4-hour drive away. And by the way, a drive that, had I known better at the time, I never would have done, and would certainly never do now. But I guess ignorance is bliss. So we drove across the country, played in a game against the one other team of wheelchair basketball players that existed in Afghanistan at that time, which was in Mazari Sharif. And that team was supported by the International Committee of the Red Cross at their physical rehabilitation center for people with disabilities in Mazari Sharif. So as we were having this game, which was the first legitimate game, for either of those teams with another competitor, I got to meet a few representatives of the ICRC, and that started a conversation with them about what we could do with this disability sport idea to expand what they were already doing with physical rehabilitation. And that was sort of the introductory conversation that led to, eventually in 2017, the ICRC taking disability sport and inclusion and making it a core component of what they do with physical rehabilitation around the world. So that at that point, they hired me to run this new program globally. And while I had been doing work with them in the years before that as a consultant, it sort of codified the impact that the disability sport could have in terms of both the physical and psychosocial rehabilitation of people with disabilities. And so now I have this amazing opportunity to work within the network of almost 40 physical rehabilitation programs in different conflict and post-conflict zones around the world, and take wheelchair basketball and other adaptive sport programs to them. But both myself and then working with other consultants, one of which was yourself, when you went to Nepal last year to help start a program there. So it's been this incredible opportunity not only to interact personally with so many athletes in these various countries, but also to tap this amazing reservoir of knowledge and motivation and talent of other coaches from around the world who are very interested in helping this growth and development of the sport.
When you were, first injured, I imagine you were depressed, right? I mean, could you have ever imagined that, you got injured and that you'd be doing things on a worldwide basis?
No, I definitely couldn't. I think when I first got injured, I was just, hoping that I'd be able to figure out how to put on my socks, and it was very, your worldview becomes very small in terms of trying to figure out how to deal with disability at the very beginning. But I mean, so I had been injured when I first went to Afghanistan, 2009. So I'd been injured almost 13 years at that point. And I wouldn't have thought 6 months before I made that trip that there was any chance I would ever in my life go to Afghanistan or any other war zone for any reason, much less to coach wheelchair basketball. I had never even coached before at that point. I was just a player. But yeah, it was just that first interaction with that group of 12 players in Maimana, as much as that probably had a massive impact on their lives and their self-perception of their place in the world and in their society, it had the same impact on me. I just realized that this one-time trip I had planned to take, to have this crazy adventure in Afghanistan was going to become my life's work. Like I just knew it immediately that whether that would ever be in the form of a job or, something that I did for a living, I didn't consider that for several years, but I just knew that I had an opportunity, this singular opportunity to make an impact on people that might otherwise never have that chance that I had to experience the power of sport for personal transformation. And so, yeah, it came out of nowhere, but it was like my life just did a 180 in that first week, and my focus completely changed, and I couldn't be happier with where it is now.
What kind of support have you had throughout your life, to get you to the point where you are today? Obviously, you have a lot inside, which, really pushes you. But how important was your family, friends, and, getting you to this point in life?
I couldn't overemphasize enough the import of the support system that I had and have continued to have, particularly around the time of my accident. When I was injured, I was 19 years old. I had been, like I said, an athlete. I was competing in track and field at the University of Oregon, and got hurt driving to go work out to prepare for my sophomore track season as a high jumper. And the the polar shift of going from that, being a young invincible person, focused on achievement in the athletic world at a pretty high level, to suddenly waking up 2 weeks later in a hospital bed and being told that I would never walk again. That's something that for anybody is a huge shock to the system. But because of whatever combination of my own personal nature through my upbringing, and through the support of that network of people that I had around me, including my family and close friends, I kind of came out of it remarkably quickly, and had a pretty positive, proactive attitude almost from the beginning. And I can't explain why that happened, but I know that having that group of people around me that had shown me personal strength in so many other contexts and were still ready to support me in my kind of my new way of perceiving the world and living life, was a huge enabler, to me to achieving the things that I did immediately, in terms of going back to school and getting a degree, and then later with wheelchair basketball kind of on the national level, and certainly, for example, when I was first considering taking this trip to Afghanistan, I called my parents from New York. They live in Oregon, where I grew up, and I said, I have this opportunity this woman brought to me to go coach in Afghanistan, and I'm really considering that I should do this. It just seems like a once in a lifetime opportunity, and fully expecting that, given especially all that they had already gone through with me, being very close to not making it through that accident, that they would probably not be that high on the idea of me going into the middle of a war zone by myself, with a couple of wheelchairs. But on the contrary, they were super supportive and said, this people don't get this type of opportunity every day. So if you feel like this is something where you can really make an impact in the world and have a positive influence on this group of people, then we fully support you doing it, against, on top of all the fear and reticence, obviously, that they and the rest of my family had. So yeah, I can't say enough about how having that system around me enabled me to get to where I am now. And that was part of the motivation for me doing this in the first place, was to kind of give other people that may not have that sort of support system an opportunity to realize some of the potential that they have in the same way that I was able to.
What are some of the major life lessons that you've learned from, playing sports?
Mm. I think I think sport is such an amazing teacher on so many levels. I mean, I've learned so much in terms of leadership by observing other players, coaches, and contributors, both that have were involved in my early sport experiences, even coaches, going back to my young school days, but particularly in the disabled sport arena, being able to interact with people that have overcome so much and really shown kind of the path for putting so many of the challenges that come with being a person with a physical disability aside, and focusing on what's really important in life and finding ways to achieve in spite of that, has been super, super illuminating. And being involved with sport, just it puts you in contact with people that have this kind of unique vitality and this unique way of finding paths and methods to overcome whatever's in their way. And so I think, the sport element of it, being able to play at a high level or coach at a high level and have those achievements is great, and it's very gratifying. But I think the life lessons that I've had the opportunity to learn in terms of just not letting anything get in your way or slow you down or block the path that you see for yourself has been the most gratifying and the most illuminating thing that I've learned through it.
I want to talk a little bit about inclusion. Um, when I lived overseas for 7 years, came back to the US and thought, hey, everything's going to be great, right? For people with disability.
Mm-hmm.
Found that not to be the case, so part of what I'm trying to do is create more inclusion. But in terms of your role, I mean, you're really looking at a worldwide kind of maybe country by country or, village by village. I mean, how do you create more inclusion?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's one that I don't think has a defined answer. And it's one that, as you point out, is not. There's no one country or society that you can point to that has done this perfectly, or that has found their way all the way there. There are certainly countries that are further ahead than others, but just like you said, you would expect, having worked in Nepal and India, that you would come back to the United States and be sort of blown away by the level of inclusion of persons with disabilities around the country. And while it might be more than in developing nations around the world, or those dealing with conflict where we work, it still has a long, long way to go. And in my mind, the way to achieve that is really through representing people with disabilities in the most positive sort of the most positive light, and kind of stripping away as much as possible the stigma that's associated with it. So the way we approach it at the ICRC, our inclusion efforts, is, while sport may seem on the surface to be almost frivolous when you're talking about places dealing with persistent conflict, like Afghanistan or South Sudan or Gaza or wherever else. In fact, when you are able to show these societies people with disabilities doing truly amazing things, somebody in Kabul, Afghanistan, turning on the news and seeing their women's national team winning a game against another country at a high level competition in Asia, that changes immediately their fundamental assumptions about what a person with a disability is capable of. And so through that, what we're trying to do is open up kind of the aperture of societies to have them think in different ways about how people with disabilities could be included, and then also work to create programs like what we instituted a year and a half ago a program we call the Career Development Program, where we're taking a lot of these disabled athletes with whom we're working, giving them different skills and sets of knowledge to help them start and maintain careers, whether working for other organizations or companies or starting their own self-employment businesses. We're trying to push into education in the same way, as well as targeting, in the future, working with governments to influence legislation that will be more inclusive of persons with disabilities. But it's really all this continuum. And I think sport was sort of this natural first step and lever to start opening those other doors for more full inclusion in society.
Yeah, I very much see sport as an entree point to just leading a very full life.
Yeah.
And that's what I always keep in the back of my mind. Um, so what do you, we're still in COVID time.
Yeah.
What is ICRC, what are you looking to do over the next year? And, in the longer term, I mean, where do you see, your efforts in, say, 5 years?
Yeah. Well, I think in the near term, what we're working on right now is I've been working with a coach from Canada who I think you may have interacted with, Joe Higgins, who's a mentor of Paul Bowes, who you worked with in Nepal. And Joe has been working on a pilot instituting a lot of virtual training techniques in several countries, including India and Nepal, over the past few months. And we're sort of testing these methods to see not only how we can use these during the remainder of the COVID moratorium on travel and in-person gatherings, but also how we can incorporate those once those barriers are not in place anymore. Because I think while COVID has been so difficult in terms of shutting down a lot of the programming that we've been able to do in the past, just because of not being able to gather people in large groups or travel, certainly. I think we can take a lot of what we're learning through the creativity of continuing these programs virtually, and then use that once we're sort of back in a normal state as well, to keep more regular touch with people and improve the sort of rate of learning and integration that we're seeing. So that's kind of the main goal right now in terms of sport, is trying to now expand that, apply it in different countries, and then hopefully continue to utilize those tools once we're back to traveling and doing in-person training camps and those sorts of things that we did before. In terms of 5 years down the road, I think that the goal is to see not only the implementation of disability sport programs in all of the physical rehabilitation programs around the world that the ICRC works in. Right now, we've got programs in about 20 countries, which is around half of the PRPs that we have around the world. So I would like to see that at close to 100% in 5 years. But in addition to that sport, I want to see, much more thorough implementation of the career development program. Want to see shifting legislation among governments that really promotes the employment and full inclusion of persons with disabilities, changing in educational institutions to make them more inclusive and accessible. And, just taking a couple big steps down the road toward disability inclusion not being something that we have to focus on in 10 or 15 years, because it's just a natural part of how these societies work.
When you go, into a country like South Sudan or Gaza, I mean, it must give people incredible hope.
Yeah, I think sport has that impact on all the people with whom we work. And I think, without being self-aggrandizing, I think being able to interact in person and build a relationship with someone who's coming from outside, their central community, but who values them and is ready to sort of incorporate them into a larger global family of athletes with disabilities is really, I think, inspiring and motivating in a lot of ways for these athletes, because again, in so many of these situations, they're kind of kept behind closed doors. They don't have much interaction historically outside of their own families or their very immediate communities. And so I think, you know, going back to Afghanistan, when I first went there, I would have colleagues or people that I was interacting with there tell me that when after I had, you know, left a practice and the players were still there, or if I had, you know, met with some other people in the community, the first thing they asked after I left was, is he really a paraplegic? Is he really a wheelchair user like us? Are you sure he's from America? And it was kind of this disbelief that somebody could, you know, that you can't just cure everything in the Western world, which is obviously not the case, but B, that someone would come that far who was just like them and interact with them in this way, I think just was something that they never expected, just like I never expected that I would do that before the opportunity presented itself. So yeah, I do think that, you know, from their perspective, it is really motivating to have this contact with, whether it's me or you or other coaches that you know, fly across the world to have these experiences with them. But I think it does the same thing for us. You know, I can't even begin to quantify the self growth that I've experienced as a result of getting to know all these people and learning from their experiences, and, you know, just having that, being able to be a part of the transformation that they're experiencing, has presented so many opportunities for growth for me as well as for them.
Well, I mean, you're truly, when I think of you, Jess, you're a world citizen, man. I mean, you know, I look at your Facebook page and see like 20 different people. And I'm like, whoa.
Yeah, it's funny. It a lot of times when my wife will post something, you know, and tag me in it, she'll get hundreds of responses from like people literally from all over the world, and me going, wow, this is incredible. Usually I post something and, you know, maybe 50 people will respond to it. And, yeah, it's pretty incredible, the kind of global family that I feel like I've become a part of as a result of this work.
And your wife, Lindsay, I mean, she's really supportive, right, of you going and doing and
She is. I mean, there are certainly a lot of challenges, and she's spent a lot of time being nervous, you know, about me being in places that are in a lot of cases um, big security risks. But she, at no point during the 10 plus years we've been together has she ever, you know, not been the most supportive person. It's just like my family, you know, when I first went to Afghanistan, which was about 6 months before I met Lindy for the first time. Just like them, she understands the risk. But she sort of internalizes some of that reticence because she knows how important this work is. And she, you know, she's had the opportunity to meet several of the players I worked with. She actually came to Afghanistan for a trip in 2013, sorry. And you know, as big a deal as that was for her to come there, getting to meet all those players and put the faces with the names that I had been talking about and that she'd been reading about on my blog was, I think that really took it to a different level in terms of her realizing how important this is, and how, as difficult as it might be, you know, before COVID, I was traveling 6 months out of the year, which doesn't leave a lot of time at home. But she has been amazing in being willing to make that sacrifice in order to see the impact that the program's having.
and so we're near the end of our interview. And do you have some final words for people, you know, maybe someone who's been newly injured, or someone who just, you know, can't get the motivation to get out there?
Yeah, I just think that, you know, it is totally normal for anyone, you know, for whatever reason. Everybody has their own challenges, but when you're dealing with the challenge of learning to live with a disability, particularly if that's something that, you know, partway through your life, you know, that change is happening, I know how difficult that is, and I know the kind of mental and emotional fortitude it takes to overcome the self-doubt and the fear and uncertainty that comes with that. But at the same time, the way I always tried to look at it was that this is allowing me a different lens through which to experience the world. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. And through the experiences I've had with wheelchair basketball and disability sport, the experiences I've had working with the International Red Cross and meeting all these incredible people that we've been talking about, I mean, I would not for a minute change the fact that I was injured when I was 19 years old, because my life has become so full, and I've had the opportunity to have such incredible, fulfilling interactions and meet such amazing people, yourself included, as a result of this having happened to me outside of my own control or choice. And I just encourage everybody to try to see their lives in that way, that this as much as this is challenging, it presents opportunities that you might never otherwise have had, to meet incredible people, to have unbelievable life-changing experiences. And I encourage everyone to just make the most of it. Find ways that you can turn this into something powerful beyond yourself, and I guarantee that it will be a fulfilling experience, not a frustrating one.
Well, Jess, thank you so much. I've smiled throughout most of this interview just hearing you talk, and I'm so happy I met you in India 5-6 years ago. So
Yeah,
thanks again.
almost 7 now, actually. It's been that long. Yeah.
Incredible. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Jess. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Yes.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for the great conversation. Look forward to being in touch soon.